Welcome to another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Of course, I'm your host, JJ Kitchen. Guys, before we get into it, go ahead and subscribe to the channel down below, like the video, share it with your friends, but more importantly, leave a comment and give me what your thoughts are on the topic of today, a 14-team playoff in 2026 with a very different model in terms of what the college football landscape could look like, especially to 14 teams. But there's a catch. The SEC and the Big Ten have to have more auto bids than everybody else. Guys, we're going to get into today. Obviously, a 3-3-2-2-1 model for the college football playoff potentially in 2026, which would be crazy thinking about. Obviously, we just expanded the playoff from 4 teams. Now we're going to talk about in potentially another 2 years going to 14 teams. Okay, which would be a crazy thing to think about. On top of that, I think that really what it comes down to is a 12-team playoff is where we should stay. I like what they do right now in terms of, hey, if you win your conference, you're in, you get an automatic bid, you're into it. But obviously, too, you have five conference champions, the Power Four, the highest group of a group of 5 team, but more importantly, 7 at-large bids to let other teams get involved to what the playoff could look like. And I think that actually looks really, really good. This is questionable. A 14-team playoff where you have, multiple bids from each conference. You only have so many at larges. You really question what this could potentially look like. But Ross Dellinger really brings this up into an article that I'm going to be able to show you guys here. I'm actually going to share my screen because I think it's a great article, what he talked about, and it goes into a little bit of depth, more importantly, about what this could potentially look like, especially, too, as the sources continue to show. As you can see on the screen right now, sources, the college football playoff circulating, new 14-team model to include 3 automatic spots for the Big Ten, SEC, but then 2 for the ACC and the Big 12, and then 1 would be the highest group of 5 team rated in the college football playoff. Guys, again, going into it here, Ross Dellinger, who is very much respected in terms of the college football landscape. He's got a lot of sources, obviously more sources than what I have, especially when you're going around the college landscape around the country, a guy that I deeply respect. So he writes here, one of the potential models for a new college football playoff may be emerging. And a format being socialized among major conference administrators, the Big Ten and SEC would each receive three automatic qualifiers into a 14-team field, with the ACC and the Big 12 getting 2 each, and a group of 5 best teams qualifying as well. Such a model would feature 3 at-large spots to the highest-ranked teams outside of the automatic qualifiers. Those briefed on the format discussed its details with Yahoo Sports Wednesday under condition of anonymity. Obviously, being anonymous, they don't want to let anybody know they're letting stuff out because that could ruin their reputation, potentially even be fired. They cautioned that the proposed model is nowhere near finalized, and it is not the only format that emerged from a meeting last week of the College Football Management Committee, an 11-group member encompassing the 10 FBS commissioners and Notre Dame's athletic director. However, this 3-3-2-2-1 format is being socialized among athletic administrators, usually one of the initial steps in the process of adopting a model. The format would start in 2026 as part of the new college football playoff television contract. In 2024 and 2025, the 12-team fields format is set. Automatic qualifiers for the 5 highest-ranked conference champions and 7 at-large spots, which we talked about before, which, me personally, I think this is the route to go. No more than 12 teams. I think if you add those 2 more teams, you're going to saturate it, especially when you look at the playoff as the way it is and constructed as of now. But the 3-3-2-2-1 model and format is not surprising. Commissioners discussed a variety of new expansion models at last week's meeting, most of them expanding the 12-team field to a 14 and granting multiple automatic berths to the 4 major conferences. The 3-3-2-2-1 format is seen as a compromise to the Big Ten and SEC's initial proposal of 4 automatic berths for both leagues. A model that is in a 14-team playoff would leave just 1 at-large spot. Timing of a final decision on a format is uncertain, but the college football playoff leaders are facing somewhat urgent timeline with regards to a new television deal. A format for a future playoff is one of several unresolved issues that the commissioners must tackle before extending a deal with ESPN through 2031, a contract worth $1.3 billion annually, according to the network's own reporting. The college football playoff revenue sharing model, as well as the voting structure, are others unresolved issues. The college football playoff executive director, Bill Hancock, believes that the issues need to be resolved within the next month. The 3-3-2-2-1 format proposal is a move towards another trend in college athletics: unequal treatment among its members. The SEC and the Big Ten, swelling to a combined 34 members, with some of the sport's biggest brands, are jockeying for more access than other leagues. The format reflects the growing gap between the new tier in the sport and the power two of all others. As it goes on, in this 14-team model, there would presumably be 2 first-round byes. The additional playoff games in the bracket would presumably be played at the home field of the other higher seeds on the current format. In the current 12-team format, the 4 highest-ranked conference champions earn a bye, while seeds numbers 5 through 8 host seeds 9 through 12 in the first-round games. Qualifiers and semifinals are held at both sites. More automatic qualifier bids could increase the value of a regular season as teams jockey to position themselves in a conference standings. Automatic qualifiers also remove the subjectivity from a college football playoff selection committee that came under fire last season for leaving out the ACC champion, Florida State. However, the high number of automatic qualifiers, whether 2 or 3 or 4, may remove some of the incentive to hold a conference championship games. Conference standings are also expected to determine automatic qualifiers. With the conference title games for now included in that formula, the future of the league title games in an expanded playoff is an issue that Yahoo Sports explored in a story in December. Several college football playoff college leaders acknowledged that a deeper examination of the championship games is necessary. Guys, one of the things that's very clear when you're reading this, one, when you're going to a 14-team playoff, the point of the SEC and the Big Ten pushing for a 3 or 4 team automatic bid is because they want more teams in there, because they say, well, we have the bigger brands. We've added, the Big Ten, for example, they've added, UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington. I think when you look at the past couple years, or even the last 5 years, Oregon and Washington have done their part in terms of what the Pac-12 has looked like. Obviously, they've had 2 or 3 losses at a time. Washington went on to the college football playoff this year, went to the national championship, and lost to the eventual champion of the Michigan Wolverines. But the question that I have here is, obviously we know what it is in terms of what the Big Ten and the SEC are doing. They're doing this in terms of being able to get more money in terms of the college football playoff money. They want more teams because they believe they're the power two, which in reality, they're the power two in terms of contracts and TV contracts. But when you look at the actual on play of the year, SEC is, SEC. I think that they are the best conference. I think they've won the most because of, Georgia and Alabama really carrying that conference. You look at the rest of the conference, are there really 4 teams in that conference that you really say, hey, these guys can really compete for a championship, when Alabama and Georgia are really just throttling those teams in that conference? The same can be said about the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Big 12. When you look at these and these automatic qualifiers, but obviously too, 2 back-to-back buys, I think that is absolutely nuts. If you're a higher ranked seed, I understand getting the 1 bye. That's totally understandable and should be expected. But 2 buys I think is absolutely absurd. While the other teams, basically what it does, it allows the other teams to beat each other up, get to that point where you have a fresh team, and then you have to face a fresh SEC or Big Ten team. I don't agree with that. I think that's a slight to the way that they want to make sure they have a national champion that's a Big Ten or SEC foe. And look, they've already got the money in terms of what they're getting, for each university. But the bigger brands, I understand they've added, the Big Ten, they've added UCLA and USC. But when you look at the on-field product, they're 2 very average to mediocre teams. Obviously, USC this past year went 7-5. They really struggled. They had a Heisman winner, and Caleb Williams, a guy that's supposedly a number 1 overall draft pick. He had multitude of issues. Obviously, USC couldn't play defense. UCLA continues to struggle. Heck, their head football coach, Chip Kelly, leaves a head coaching position to join Ohio State as an offensive coordinator. That's a massive problem. Also has questions, UCLA has major questions about their NIL effectiveness. Chip Kelly talked about it behind closed doors, saying that, the reason I left it, I didn't want to deal with NIL, but also, too, they're struggling with NIL. Yeah, so USC and UCLA are two large brands, but when it comes to what they've done recently, they've been very much average to below average football teams. I think in the Big Ten, obviously, we'll continue to see what Michigan looks like with obviously Jim Harbaugh moving on, but the top echelon of the Big Ten has always been Michigan and Ohio State. Will Ryan Day get over the hump this year after back-to-back losses, to Michigan? That's a major question mark. You have to start thinking about that. There's really 2 or 3 years in a row now that Michigan's lost, that Michigan's beaten Ohio State. Ryan Day can potentially on the hot seat, which I think would be absolutely nuts. I think he's a great football coach. Has led them to multiple 11-win seasons. Heck, even if it's one loss to Michigan, I know the rivalry's a rivalry, but it's 11 wins. I mean, the guy's done a hell of a job at Ohio State and really obviously kept Ohio State, at the top of the Big Ten. How many years, 11 years in a row, Ohio State beat Michigan. But it's always been those top two. And then you had, obviously, Penn State always in the mix. They haven't been able to get over the hump. I think James Franklin has a lot to prove in the Big Ten in terms of what he can do. Obviously, he has not been able to beat Ohio State. He's beaten them once. He's 1-9 versus Ohio State, 2-7 versus Michigan. That's a big question mark. Obviously, a losing record to Michigan State. He's got a lot of things to worry about there in terms of getting to the next level. I think a 12 or 14 team playoff certainly helps a team like a Penn State out who hasn't gotten the playoff. But with more teams, more at large bids, you can definitely see a Penn State getting in there. But besides that, when you look at besides those 3 teams, I just don't see a team in there that could really, is guaranteed to affect those conferences. 3 automatic bids, and in my opinion, for the Big Ten, I think obviously when you add in Oregon and Washington, you'll have a conversation about Michigan, Ohio State, and then Washington and Oregon and Penn State jockeying for that 3rd spot. But then you look at the SEC. Obviously, you have Georgia. What does Alabama look like under Caleb DeBoer, the new head football coach of the University of Alabama, taking over for the legend and Nick Saban? What does that potentially look like? So you have those 2 at the top. But Tennessee has never been consistent. Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin's got them moving in the right direction, obviously, back-to-back years in terms of their record, winning 20-plus games. Haven't done that since the 80s. That's an incredible job by Ole Miss, what they're able to do. When you look at the overall conference, obviously you'll have Oklahoma and Texas now involved. They're thinking in terms of what Oklahoma, they're thinking in terms of, Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama, and Georgia. But at the same time, though, are those really, you had Texas in there this year. They barely lost to a Washington team. But obviously, when Washington went to go face Michigan, obviously Michigan just really handled Washington really well in the playoffs. So you really ask those questions. When you look at those conferences and you look at the ACC at this point, if Florida State continues to stay in the conference, obviously they got a tough legal battle. I just did a previous video on that in the terms of, the legal battle, the ACC stronghold on Florida State. But overall, you have Florida State, Clemson, what those two teams are able to do. What is UNC able to do in terms of building off of it? NC State, Pitt won it recently in 2021. But also, too, you have Miami. Cam Ward coming in Miami this year. Are they able to actually jump up and really accept the responsibility of what that program is able to do? That's been a questionable mark. But more importantly, they haven't won an ACC title since really they entered the ACC. So that's been a major discussion out of the University of Miami and their swagger and, obviously the U and their history, what they're able to do. So there's obviously some really good brands, big brands, in the ACC for football. And then you have the Big 12. The Big 12, what are they able to do as the new conference really looks at themselves without the 2 big brands that really carried the Big 12? Obviously, Oklahoma and Texas carrying the conference, now leaving, but then you have room now. What does it look like for, Utah coming in? Does Utah come from the Pac-12 to take over the Big 12 and continue to run that conference now? My biggest thing is I think Utah is a really good coach with Kyle Whittingham. I think they have a potential to really take a stronghold on that conference, take the leadership now with Oklahoma and Texas gone. But you also have a team like Oregon State, not Oregon State, Kansas State taking over. Chris Kleiman, I think he's done a hell of a job. He's been always competitive in there, was obviously recently in the Big 12 title game. What is he able to do? So you have Utah, Kansas State. What does Kansas continue to look like? Obviously, a new contract for their head football coach, Lance Leipold. I think he's done a hell of a job. But the questionable mark is, What does their team look like now losing their offensive coordinator to Penn State? What does that look like for that team? But more importantly, West Virginia, they brought up a ton of thunder from last year, obviously squeaked by with a number of different games, was able to get to the 8-4 mark and able to beat a team in UNC in the bowl game. Obviously, UNC didn't have all of their starters. They were missing more than half their team, but a win's a win. 9 wins last year. I think you have Arizona in terms of what are they able to look like without Jed Fish. It's a lot of discussion just in the Big 12 with no major brands, but I think Utah has a real opportunity to dominate that conference and to be that next level in terms of what they're able to do in the Big 12. So there's plenty of question marks of who really deserves more automatic bids, or should they be equal? The 3-3, 2-2-1 model, and obviously the group of 5 getting one of the highest, the highest ranked group of 5 team gets in. What does that look like? Whether it's a Tulane, anybody from the MAC, Toledo, Coastal Carolina from the Sun Belt, you have certainly all those questions. So guys, in the comments section, let me know what you think. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. Let me hear your thoughts. What do you think of the current model? What do you think of the potential of a 14-team playoff? Is it too much? Is it just right? Do you like the model? Let me know your thoughts. Obviously, I enjoy the conversation in the discussions. More importantly, hearing your thoughts. So again, subscribe to the channel. We'll be having some visitors on, especially attorneys, and in terms of being able to break down the Florida State ACC battle, as the ACC has a stronghold according to a number of different attorneys that have really brought a different perspective. Things that now the national media is now getting a hold of and talking about. So again, guys, give me your thoughts of what you think, but more importantly, I love the discussion in the comments section. So guys, as always, enjoy yourselves. Thank you for stopping by, but more importantly, as always and forever, hail to Pitt. I'll see you next time.